who's giving me the green light here? You ready to roll? You good? No, I'm going to introduce you. Good evening, everyone. It's good to have you all here tonight. My name is Vince Carilli, and I serve as the Vice Chancellor for Student Life, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel discussion. Our event has been organized by our Student Government Association as a way to engage our campus community in important and timely dialogue. As a public university, our campus is a marketplace of ideas. The university embraces the free flow of ideas in its ensuing debate and will protect the freedom of our campus community to vigorously debate these ideas. Before we begin, I'd ask that all of you respect our speakers, our students who organized the event, and our fellow students, faculty, and staff who are in attendance tonight by allowing all speakers to be heard. University policy and state law prohibit substantial obstruction or interference with this event. Those who attempt to interrupt a speaker or otherwise prevent him or her from being heard will be asked to leave the facility and may be subject to disciplinary or legal action. We appreciate your cooperation in this regard. Now, before we begin, I'd like to introduce our Chancellor, Dr. Beverly Davenport, for a few words. Dr. Davenport.
Welcome to all of you all, and especially thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight, but especially thank you for caring about this topic, caring about the expertise that we have here on our campus at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Tonight is a part of nearly 2 weeks of thought about this topic. I love this title, Your Voice Matters. Your voice does matter, and the voices of our experts with us here tonight matter. I think you've heard me say on many, many occasions, and it's really regrettable that we have to wait until there is an event to stake claim for what our values are and what we believe and what we hold dear. But also what we hold dear is the debate of intellectual ideas, and what we hold dear is all of the wisdom and stored knowledge that this group of experts has. I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, but I want to let you know that this dialogue is going to continue every night. I'm meeting tomorrow night with a group of faculty. Of course, on Thursday night, I hope you know that we are having Lucretia Clark, who's here from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and we have each day held conversations and discussions and dialogues on a variation of the theme, whether it's about racism, whether it's about white supremacy, whether it's about hate, whether it is about what the values of the University of Tennessee community are. We have been speaking every day on this topic. I have asked you in writing, and I've said many places where I've been, to turn away from the words that we despair and despise and turn toward the words that capture who we are and what we value. And I think you're going to hear that tonight. So without much more, I want to introduce to you our experts. We have faculty, we have students, we have staff, we have administrators, we have our law enforcement who has pledged in every way to ensure that whatever we do every day on this campus will be protected by them. So again, thank you. The discussion will open to all of you to hear your voices once we finish, but the beginning is to hear from our panelists who have come to us from very different parts of our campus to address this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Davenport. So I guess right now we'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So Chief Lane, can we start with you?
I'm Troy Lane. I'm an Associate Vice Chancellor for Public Safety and Chief of Police.
John Zomchik, Interim Provost and Senior Vice Chancellor.
Good evening. Shea, Kidd-Houze. I serve as Assistant Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students.
My name is Michael Curtis, and I currently serve as Student Body Vice President.
Turner Matthews, Senior Studying Political Science and Baker Scholar.
Hi, I'm Michael Higdon. I'm a Professor of Law at the College of Law.
Hi, I'm Michelle Christian. I'm an Assistant Professor in the Department of Sociology.
Good evening. I'm Dorian McCoy. I'm an Associate Professor in the College of Education, Health and Human Sciences.
We want to thank our panelists for being with us tonight. A little bit about our format. So tonight I have a set of prepared questions that I will be asking and directing toward a particular panelist. We will ask them to respond in about 3 minutes or so, and then that will leave us a little bit of time just in case any other panelists want to jump in and add a comment or two, a brief comment or two. about the question that was posed to perhaps another panelist. With that being said, I'd like to start, if we can, and we will start with Dr. McCoy. Dr. McCoy, it seems that there's an increase in incidents involving extremist groups like the Traditionalist Workers' Party that are on the rise. Why is this the case?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to go straight to the top. I believe there's a rise or an increase because some of the rhetoric that's coming from the leadership of the country. When you fail to condemn racism publicly, when you fail to call it out, people feel empowered. I believe that some of these supremacist groups feel empowered. David Duke, some of the leaders of the Klan, other extremist groups have said they feel empowered by what the leadership of this country is saying. I also think social media is playing into it. Whether it's social media or the mass media, what's being published, people out there are buying into some of the rhetoric that's being spewed by some of the hate groups, and they're recruiting. They're recruiting young and impressionable individuals. Some of these individuals, they feel like they are experiencing erasure. They feel like their history is being erased. I'm not sure how that happens when people of color, marginalized groups, have not had their history exposed or presented. They will say that removing of Confederate statues, that's erasure. I disagree with that. They're feeling attacked, so I think this is why you're seeing these groups coming up. I think there's a historical perspective, and if I bring it home closer to where we are, the University of Tennessee, part of that historical perspective, let's own our history because so often we want to avoid it. Tennessee is the home of the Ku Klux Klan. It's where it was founded. The history of people of color in East Tennessee, which is predominantly white or overwhelmingly white, has been erased. It's not shared. There were Native Americans. There were slaves. But if you look at the surrounding counties outside of Anderson, Knox, and the tourist strip in Sevier County, those areas are predominantly or overwhelmingly white. So I think they're buying into some of that historical aspect. If we bring it to campus, we have to look at the historical context. We've only been integrated 55 years, okay? We can't forget how long this institution existed before we started moving forward. So I think those are some of the reasons that these groups are gaining more presence on college campuses in the surrounding community and in the country.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists want to respond to that question? You said it so well, Dorian. There you go.
Thank you, Dr. Carilli.
The next question is for Professor Christian. They say they're coming to recruit new members. What makes UT and East Tennessee so attractive to white supremacist groups?
Well, first I just want to thank my fellow panelists for being on the panel with you, and also SGA for having and sponsoring this really important event. I want to jump on what Dr. McCoy had said. I hadn't jumped in because I knew my question was next. So I'm a sociologist, and one of my specialty areas is in race and racism and the history of kind of global white supremacy and also its contours here in the United States. I teach a class on race and racism, so I talk about this issue a lot. And one thing I talk about with my students that always kind of hits home, a theme that Dr. McCoy brought up, is how we really don't know our history. We particularly don't know our history when it comes to the founding of our nation, which was created on a foundation of racism and racial inequality. We don't know the history of racial violence and terror that was enacted against people of color, particularly African Americans and indigenous populations. We don't know how this was codified within our legal systems and spread throughout multiple other structures and systems. Here in Tennessee, we unfortunately have, like many states, not just Tennessee, but as Dr. McCoy said, we all have to put this in context, have our own particular history. We are the founding of the KKK in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865, which emerged at the specific moment after the Civil War when African Americans were finally receiving their freedom and hopefully their franchisement rights. There was a big pushback against Reconstruction era of trying to give African Americans their rights, and part of that pushback was the role of white racial terror. And this comes in the role of lynchings. We had 225 lynchings in Tennessee up until 1950. This is racial terror that was committed against our own fellow Tennesseans with impunity. We also had the Memphis Massacre that happened in 1866, where roughly 50 African Americans were killed because of them trying to reach their, at that point, citizenship rights. And the backlash to Reconstruction comes from our own Tennessean Andrew Johnson, who has quoted in saying that the United States was only for white people. We don't know this history. If we don't know this history, then we can't understand the continuation of such groups like the TWP and others who have fed into this longer historical narrative on white supremacy. If we don't know our history, what our parents tell us and everyone else, we're bound to repeat it. And I think it's a particular political moment that we are in, where there is another backlash to the small racial progress we received by having the first African American president. That is not a surprise. After every single movement towards racial progress in the United States, there has been a quick and severe and often violent backlash. And we are in that moment right now. And I also think that universities, again, as Dr. McCoy said, are being targeted specifically. They're being targeted specifically because of all the reasons why we love being here at UT and at universities in general. Because it's a place for us to come and explore ideas, to challenge ourselves, to think about things we were not forced to think about prior to coming here, where we learn about new ideas and often come to terms with these past injustices that, unfortunately, through our education system and other ways, we haven't come to terms with. You know, we hold up these great ideals about what it means to be an American, but so much about what it means to be an American are those who are not allowed to reach those ideals. And those people were people of color, or other marginalized identities. And so, again, all of these events, you know, as I tell my students, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This has come and emerges from a longer historical history. And as I say a lot in my class, we never came to terms with over 355 years of overt systemic racism built within all of our systems of America. And until we come to terms with that, until we fully say that that was our history and we have a long way to go, even with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, then we are never going to be able to truly live up to these ideals that so many of us say we want to.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on that question? Okay. Next question is for Professor Higdon. Professor, if you could tell us a little bit about the rights of extremist groups and why they are protected, and if so, why are my rights being violated as it relates to the speech that they offer? Can you explain this in the context of the law?
I will try. It's a complicated question, and the answer is not always satisfactory to hear. But I want to start by giving you a little bit of relatively recent history. In the late 1980s, early 1990s, a number of colleges and universities became concerned with what we are concerned with still today, and that is, how can you offer equality of opportunity if certain groups on campus are being marginalized or being told that they are unwelcome or being told that they are not good enough? So a number of schools at that time passed what was called speech codes. About 300, 400 schools. I'll just read quickly. This is from Michigan. They passed one that they prohibited speech. Well, they prohibited any behavior, verbal or physical, that stigmatizes or victimizes an individual on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, sex, sexual orientation, creed, etc. Every one of these that were challenged in court, and you may think, who were challenging these things? Was it white nationalists? No, it wasn't. It was people like graduate students who said, because of this, it's a little bit overbroad, I can't discuss in my classroom things related to my topic area. Or editors of student newspapers who say, we can't run editorials on this because it runs afoul of this. So they brought challenges. In every case, the court struck down the speech code that the university had enacted. And the reason behind that is that under the First Amendment, the answer here is pretty clear. Whatever opportunities a university offers people and groups for speech, it has to offer those to everybody, and it cannot discriminate on the basis of content. So, for example, if the University of Tennessee tried to prohibit this group from speaking here, they would be sued, they would lose, they would get an injunction, and they would be allowed to speak here anyway. Why is that? Well, often in situations like this, if you think about, for example, flag burning, which was a big issue at one point, it's easy to focus on one speech. This group is saying this, and we don't like that, and we hate that. And we can say that. We have the right to say that. The law looks at it more as a holistic conversation. They want a robust conversation. The First Amendment is to protect a robust conversation. This person says this, and this person responds with this, and this group protests in this way, and we hope that on the back end we're better off than we were at the front end. That's sort of what the law is going at. But the First Amendment also protects you. You don't have reduced rights under this. You can say, I disagree with this. You can protest this. The university can say they disagree with this. I think our leadership and Chancellor Davenport have done an excellent job of publicly stating this does not represent the values of University of Tennessee. And I just want to close, because I'm getting a little long on my talk, of what, if you go to the ACLU's website, regardless of what you think of the ACLU, they have a really nice section that talks about speech on campus, specifically hate speech. And in their opening paragraph, they say this: the First Amendment to the Constitution protects speech no matter how offensive its content. Restrictions on speech by public colleges and universities amount to government censorship in violation of the Constitution. Such restrictions deprive students of their right to invite speech they wish to hear, debate speech with which they disagree, and protest speech they find bigoted or offensive. An open society depends on liberal education, and the whole enterprise of liberal education is founded on the principle of free speech. So if you're struggling to sort of make sense of all this, and I understand that, a lot of people do, this is sort of the policy that animates the law, that full conversation that we're trying to have.
Does anyone else want to add comment? Please.
I'll add something real quick. I found this quote that I thought really goes along with what we're trying to do as a university in preparation for the coming events this weekend. And it's a quote by Thomas Jefferson, and it goes right along with what you were saying about how this is coming. If we tried to stop it, they'd come anyway. And so I think that our university has done a great job to show what we are about, what we stand for. And this quote, I think, just goes right along with that. Error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it, by President Thomas Jefferson. So I think we've done a great job in order to show that they're coming, but let it be known that this is not what we stand for. So I just wanted to add that.
Professor.
Yeah, I just want to add and kind of jump in a little bit. So I'm not a legal scholar or a lawyer, so I don't know all of kind of the legal arguments. However, I do look at this sociologically and historically, and I think if you look at something like the law is something that was created by societies and people, meaning that is the political act, right? And I think it's important to remember that the First Amendment existed contemporaneously with slavery for nearly 100 years. So when we fetishize the law, these ideas, which are important utopistic ideas, we still need to root it in the social context and the history of that law. And the history of people of color and oppressed peoples in the United States is how laws did not protect them. And it's how, particularly the First Amendment and their relationship to the First Amendment, they basically made progress by acting in defiance to that law. And I think it's, again, also important to continually to remember and think about our history and our founding fathers who did come up with these ideas. But they were fathers, meaning they were men, and they were white men. And Thomas Jefferson, with his ideas, was also one of our first American thinkers to theorize a racial theory of inequality. And he was a slaveholder. Now, that does not take away other achievements when thinking about the creation of our country, but it also puts it into context. And this is what I push with my students. You can think about these ideas, but you have to root them in the political and sociological and historical moment of that time.
Can I ask Professor Higdon a question?
Sure.
So help me out from a legal perspective. If we had said no and they sued, has there not been precedents where the university countersued? And what has been the outcome of that? I believe there's been some literature to that, but again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm asking for clarification and to help educate, because that is something I'm hearing people ask. Why didn't we say no and take that chance?
Right, it's a good question. One, I don't know what we would countersue for, right, if we just denied to do that. I know of no case where a university has won an argument like this. And sort of going back to your point, when the university has lost, it's always been with an injunction that requires them to let the people come speak. And now they come in clothed with this aura of martyr, right? People tried to deny us the right to speak, and now we can speak. And so, but I know of no case. It's a good question. And to your point, it's an excellent point. The Constitution is a fluid concept, and it evolves. And the First Amendment has evolved, and who knows where it may evolve in the future. There was a case a few years ago, Reverend Phelps, the church where they would go protest funerals and everything else whenever they wanted to protest something. That went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld their right to do it. But Alito wrote a really good dissent where he said, maybe this doesn't help society. Maybe this type of speech is something we can start to carve out. So I love that you're teaching your students that, because maybe as the law evolves, we'll take a more nuanced view of it.
And I think also as the law evolves, I know also thinking about it, how do we make the law to live up to the principles we want the law to live up to, which is equality, right? And I think what gets lost in the free speech debate is equality, and who are those who are most marginalized by hate speech, and how that has basically been used as a wedge and a tool historically. And the alt-right and these groups are kind of loving that we're debating free speech right now, right? Because then we're not focusing on hate speech, and we're not focusing on the continuation of racism and white supremacy. We're talking about important conversations about the law and how it can be approved, but as opposed to having a wider discussion, which we are, unfortunately, but other folks are not, about basically the history and the contemporary context of racism in America, United States, Tennessee, but in our university as well. Like, we have a long way to go, as Dr. McCoy mentioned, of kind of healing the wounds and mitigating the structural problems of hundreds of years of segregated education. We've been segregated more than we've been integrated, and that takes a long time to dismantle those structures that built that.
Anybody else? Great. Turner, you're up next. Based on what you hear from fellow students, is UT truly a marketplace of ideas? That is, are all views welcomed? If not, who do you believe is slighted?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to just thank you all for choosing me to be a part of this event, and I'm really honored to be on the same stage with these distinguished representatives and leaders for our university. But when I talk to students on our campus about this issue and how they feel, I think that the general consensus is that many students think that this is an open and acceptive learning environment and place where they can come to as a launching point to start their careers and their futures. We have people that come here from all over the state, all over the country, all over the world. And with that, it brings a lot of different backgrounds. It brings different cultures. It brings different socioeconomic statuses, races, everything. And I think that our university as a whole does a great job at making sure that no matter where you come from, no matter what you think, that this is a place that is accepting of what you think, that when you leave this place, you're going to be equipped with the necessary tools to go out there into the world and be successful and to change the world, ultimately. But with that being said, at a university with as many students as we have, close to nearly 30,000, that's not to say that there aren't some isolated cases where some students may be persecuted or not accepted of their views or of who they are. And I think that that's something that we should not overlook, because we shouldn't just settle with just a little bit or just isolated instances. We shouldn't settle until we know that we've got it all together. And I think that's something that we can all work toward every day as a campus community, from faculty, staff, students, everyone, working together to make sure that we have that environment for our campus. And so free speech is one of the hallmarks of our democracy. Our country, our state, our campus, they all are what they are because of the uniqueness of every individual. It's what makes us who we are. The different values, the different backgrounds, ideas and such, all may be different. We may not look the same, but together we are united as one. We're united as Tennesseans, we're united as Americans, and here at this place we're united as volunteers, and that's something that I'm proud to say that I am. So it is my hope that we can eliminate these isolated instances and unwelcoming rhetoric regarding certain ideas, and instead celebrate our differences and celebrate the things that aren't like us. Because when we open our mind to see that you have something different than I have to offer, a different ideology. I'm in political science, so sometimes there isn't much congruency or coming together, and I think that that's something that we should work on, because I think that when we come together, it's better for everyone else. And so I think when we celebrate our differences, we're able to learn from others, and that improves ourselves, that improves our campus, our state, our country, and it makes it a better place to live in. So thank you.
Any other panelists want to add? Yeah. Mickey, go ahead.
So I wholeheartedly believe that celebrating differences and accepting everybody from their background is a place where we want to be, but I can assure, and I think a lot of students can attest it, but that's not where we are just yet. And the question was, is UT a free marketplace of ideas? I think that many students think that UT is a marketplace of ideas where anything can be said or anything can be done, and something or anything cannot be monitored or in a sense controlled. So, because I mean, there's been instances where students have informed me where they're walking down pedestrian walkway or walking down the street and somebody calls out of the car a racial slur, right? That's an idea that they have in this marketplace, right? And sure, that can be expressed, but what's going to be done about it? So it's kind of uncontrolled. And the last part of the question, which I think was not mentioned, it says, if not, who was slighted? I think that marginalized groups, people of color, LGBTQ+, and other students are slighted in that manner because of not identifying with the majority. So we have a majority amount of students here who are white, right? And then a very marginalized group of students who identify with those with LGBTQ+, or with being a person of color. And so oftentimes, and I like to think about the scenario, and I'm sorry, my time is getting very low. I'd like to think about the scenario of if you have a whole entire crowd of people, their voice is going to be so loud with people who think like you, who care about the same things. But if you have a smaller group of 5 people, that shout is not going to be that loud. So we have a large amount of students who don't care about what's going on campus. Then that free marketplace of ideas, what is that being wholeheartedly filled with, if that makes sense? Who is really speaking in this marketplace of ideas, and what message are we sending?
I want to just add, as I'm listening to the two of you, I'm reminded, I think this whole question about the marketplace of ideas and if all views are valued, this whole concept of diversity versus inclusion. I think we have diverse ideas. We have lots of conversations that are happening, and those are out there, and people are sort of talking at each other, and we're kind of coexisting on this campus of more than 28,000 students, but there's not a lot of intersection. So to your point, there's not a lot of intersection with people who might think differently or who might have different ideological views. And so I think that's the work that we have to do, is this whole inclusion piece of the puzzle. We often say those words like they're the same. And so while we have, I think, done a good job, and we've made advances in what diversity looks like as it relates to all the social categories that we like to rattle, I think the hard conversations, grappling with people coming from lots of different backgrounds, creating a space where people feel like they matter and where people feel like they belong, that's where we've got to draw our attention to, and that's what we have to work on. So I don't think that the marketplace of ideas and all views being valued is the same question. And I really think we've got to focus on that second part of it.
Dorian?
Turner, I appreciate your comments. I do want to push back just a little bit about how we're united. We're united as Tennessee. We're united as a country. I'm going to disagree because I think we're feeding into this idea that we're united with the exception of some bad people. We've got this idea that racism is an individual thing. We got this idea that homophobia is an individual thing. Well, how is that being manifested both on an institutional and a societal level? Okay? Personally, I think we're the greatest country in the world. I also think we're a flawed country, and nobody wants to talk about the flaws. Okay? I don't want to move, but I think we got some issues we need to address. Okay? And there's so many people out there that don't want to address those issues. Also here, when we say united as one, united according to whose standards, whose ideas, whose ideologies, whose stories. You see, when my 13 or 11-year-old is walking down the neighborhood with his white friend, and two gentlemen in a beat-up pickup with the rebel flag comes into it, and they call them the N-word, I don't feel united. I'm angry. I don't feel united as a Tennessean. I don't feel united as a U.S. citizen. I feel like I'm being marginalized. That's historical. That's contemporary. That's a combination. Okay? So we got to get, and vol means all. I've been in some discussions. What exactly does that mean, and who's leaving part of their identities at the door? Because when I talk to black undergraduates on this campus, and I came from the whitest state in the country, Vermont. I was at the University of Vermont before I came here. When I got here, I would ask black students, because I'm from the South, I'm like, yo, what's your name? How you doing? Where you from? But when I would ask them where they from, after about 5-6 times, because I'm not that smart, I realized they'd do something like this. And finally, I asked somebody, I said, what is it with me asking you about where you from? And they said, on this campus, they think we from Memphis or certain parts of Nashville and Chattanooga. And I see Michael Curtis shaking his head, yes. So you know what? I stop asking black students where they from. Because there's an assumption if you black on this campus, you're from Memphis or you're an affirmative action student. And we, meaning us, not everybody's hearing that, or some of us don't want to hear it because we bought into this idea that's just an isolated incident. No, it's systemic. It's widespread. I agree with most of what you said. I think there's some value. But this idea that we're united as one, there's too much dissension right now. We're not united. We're very isolated, and we're very divided.
Please.
Well, I want to thank you all for adding that input, because I think that's good to have a discussion like this, because your experiences are different than mine. Your experiences are different than mine. And I think it's good to confront these issues head on, because we all have different experiences, and we've all we know people that have had different experiences, and we've seen things from a different viewpoint and standpoint. And so hearing this shows that even more, we've got more work to do, because as me growing up, I thought that a lot of this was something of the past and that we were further along than we are. And I think that maybe we'd like to have thought that. And I think that the last year and a half and last 2 years I think it's been a sign that we're not as far along as we thought that we are.
I think we've made progress, but we got so much progress to make that people don't realize, well, why can't we all get along? And that's feeding into some of that. And I'm going to say this broadly, because when I say colorblind ideology, that's not just about race. That's talking about dismissing or not being able to see all of those identities. Because when I walk onto this campus, you know what I am to a lot of people? I'm just another black male. I can walk into an office and ask for something, and I'm like, yo, why are you upset? Then I'll say, I'm Dr. McCoy, and they're apologizing. I'm like, you should have treated me right the first time.
Absolutely. And I think it's a tragedy that we're at this point in 2018, because this is, you would think, a discussion we were having in the 1960s or prior. And thank you for sharing, and thank you all for sharing, because I think that shows to all of us how much work we've got to do and how much more aware we all need to be of these things going on. And thank you for enlightening me, because in the places that I've been on this campus, I think that they have been inclusive, and I think that we've celebrated diversity. And that's my experiences in my realm of the University of Tennessee. And so I'm glad that you brought forth where on this campus it's not that way all the way. So thank you for enlightening me. Thank you.
I know we're kind of keep going on about this issue, but I think it's really important, and I think this is actually a great conversation. But I just want to, again, I'm always going to push that, think about it sociologically. Like, think about what the concept marketplace of ideas really means in the political historical moment which it's based. Does that mean all ideas are legitimate ideas that just need to be debated out? Can we come to some decision as a society that Nazism and white supremacy are not ideas that we should be debating regarding if one is better than the other? And we come to this after a very brutal, violent history of our world of many, many millions of people who have died and been killed because of these ideas. And I don't want to be the downer here who's always bringing up, this really terrible history, but it's not just history anymore. People are continually being killed because of these ideas. I don't think we need to think far when we think about Charlottesville. I don't think we need to think about other communities who have been killed because of overt white supremacy. But I just want to echo with Dr. McCoy here, though. One thing is, as important as this discussion is of focusing on kind of overt racism and overt white supremacy, we must not forget the institutional structural foundation of racism. And that even when all of us on this panel, I hope, and in this room can all say, I'm not a racist and I don't carry those ideas, we continue to live in a society where we see racial inequality in every single structural system that we have. There has to be something going on in our systems right now that have created that foundation where it gets perpetuated without there being this kind of overt racist boogeyman. So as we're having this panel about this terrible overt racism and white supremacy, we also still need to think about the work which we should still be doing on us as institutions. How do we reform our public education system? How do we reform our higher education system? How do we think about criminal justice? How do we think about employment? How do we think about the legal structure? Those are the questions I wish we could be having instead of just focusing on, this kind of bad apple overt racist idea. And so, and I think that plays into this larger narrative too, that, racism is just these individualized people as opposed to I was in this discussion last week, and someone had said it's this cancer that's kind of impacted us all as a society that we never fully recovered from.
Great, thank you. I'd like to move on if we can. So, Mickey, you're up next. Michael. So you're our SGA Vice President, correct?
That's right.
All right. So tell us what you're hearing from your fellow students.
All right.
What can be done to make them feel safe and welcome here at UT?
Okay, well, thank you for the question, and thank you for allowing me to be on the panel. So, as a small caveat, the panel was supposed to be a little bit later, and so I was planning to get a lot of input from students. So I did get a chance to talk to a student group yesterday, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and also going through talking to individual students to gain information, which I'm about to present to you today. I'd like to begin by saying that, and I wholeheartedly believe, nothing is new under the sun. So coming from slavery to Jim Crow to separate but equal to the moments during the Civil Rights Movement till now, nothing is totally new. It just has been molded to fit and be a little bit more acceptable to our current conditions. And so how do students feel today? Some students are walking around campus saying that, hey, that event that we had at the Rock cured racism. We have nothing else on this campus. Good job, SGA. It's time to go study, or maybe not even go study. All right, and students feeling that way and walking around campus, but another part is students having apathy towards it. So again, like seeing that nothing's new under the sun. So way before the event or the speaker coming to campus, what has happened to students who feel marginalized, right? And so having that prick keep going, being probed so constantly, and then now with this big event being pushed down, is what more can we do? I can't feel so much because I've been hit with so many different things. I'm slightly becoming immune to it. And sometimes, in another aspect, students are tired of talking about it, right? So we're talking about it, but we're not acting about it. We're talking about racism. We're talking about how it's bad. We're talking about how we love civility, and we want every student to be included. But some students don't feel that. Some students feel like it is not an action that is being taking place. But on the other end, we have some very passionate students out here. They want to battle the injustices. They understand that injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. They understand how it connects. But how many students feel that way? How many students are actually passionate about understanding the history, which I really appreciate you all sharing, and then understanding how does that play into our current situation? Again, going back to that talking, we can say that we love civility and we support each student and we want inclusion, but how many students are actually acting in that way? How many students are actually acting, saying, I'm welcoming you and I'm going to support you for who you are? And then the last thing I'll say before answering the last question, I know I get long-winded sometimes, is privilege. The idea of privilege. So again, on campus we have a majority of students that have a privilege with their voice. So how are students using their voice in order to support other groups that may not have as powerful or may not have as great of a voice that they have? How can students that do have that privilege pull up other students that are sliding towards the ground and support them just a little bit more? How can we provide those students equity, right? And so I am wholeheartedly believe that it doesn't start at a top level. It starts with students, with us. How can I, as a student, support another student that feels marginalized or does not feel included? How can I lend and help enhance that student? And then your last part of your question, and I'll close with that, is how can we help them feel safe? How can we help students feel safe on campus? And I think it's about education in two aspects. So number one, educating about the policies or the great things in place to help students feel safe. So for example, I just read the campus free speech bill, right? And I asked a group of students yesterday, NAACP, I said, hey, how many of you all know about that? Nobody raised their hands. Right? So in that room of about 20 students, nobody understood what was in this document and what kind of governs us here at the university, governs the state of Tennessee and the institutions. So I think it's important that we begin to educate folks about the policies or what's going on a legislative level so we can understand what is there and what can I do in order to redefine what it means. And on the other end of the education is presenting education in the classroom. So redefining and helping students figure out how to think critically about their own ideas. Often students come here with their own ideas, with their parents or their family members' ideas of what happened a long time ago. So we have parents who are not living in this generation, who have their ideas from a while ago, and that ideology has been fostered down in a chain, and it's not being cut. So I believe that inviting that thinking critically in the classroom to cut that chain. And I will cite one instance and I'll be done. Thank you for letting me talk. So in my course, as a nursing student, we have two courses that really have changed my perspective, even as a person of color. The first one is transcultural nursing, which I like to call diversity nursing. So we learned how to take care of people that did not identify as the majority of folks that would be admitted to the hospital, which oftentimes, in my experience, are white, elderly men, to be honest, with heart conditions. So, they have a lot of heart conditions. So, seriously, go to the hospital and walk around. I had to make some jokes here. And I learned exactly how to think, right? And I'll cite this and I'll be done. Is at first I called people who did not have a home, homeless people, right? And some people think that that's a good term. But throughout the whole entire course, the phrase was coined, people experiencing homelessness, all right? So they're people first. Just so happen, right now, they do not have a home to go to. So it taught me to see people for who they are, the characteristics, seeing them as a human being, acknowledging their circumstance, acknowledging their color, acknowledging their past, but trying to develop a love for them. How can I support you in this experience not by judging you for what I may feel on the outside, but learning about you, learn about your experiences, and how can we move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in there?
I want to, first of all, when you listen to our students, it's just amazing because we have so much noise, I think, going on in the media and when we look on our timelines. And then I sit next to these two, and it reminds me of why I'm in the work that I do, so I appreciate that. So Michael, we'll be formal tonight. Michael said that he focused a lot on the student aspect of what can be done to make the university safe. And while I agree that change often occurs from our students talking to us and sharing their opinions, I think it also has to occur at the top. And I think we've seen a great example of what that looks like, of what stating and sharing your values and what living out those values look like through our Chancellor. And so I appreciate that. And I will say that truly students can push and push and push, and without the leadership, we can't move this forward. So I think it takes a holistic approach to all of this. So we have to look at hiring practices. We have to look at what's going on in the classroom. We have to think about what faculty training looks like. We have to look at who are we recruiting? Where are we recruiting? I heard a person talk about the fact that the institutions who want diverse faculty have them. So we just have to figure out what we have to do to get them here. And so everything from literature that we're publishing in admissions, to the messaging that students are hearing at orientation, to the follow-up at Welcome Week, to the midterm conversations that we're having. I think that's the piece of the second part of the question that's not easy, but we have to look at, all students' lived experience. So it's often to say everyone or no one, but every student, and it's hard, it's not easy. That's why we're here at the table, but we have to think about what are those individual lived experiences and how do we help to impact those. So it's a collective responsibility. Oftentimes the education for all of this, we rely on our students of color. We rely on our students in the margins to educate the rest of the campus. And the onus has to be on us. When I get up in the morning, I have to think about what are my biases? What are those? Where do I hold privilege? As a black woman with a PhD who identifies as a Christian, there's privilege there. There's earned privilege, there's unearned privilege, and I have to own that when I walk onto this campus because that's how I show up in a space. So I think we've got to do that work internally, and it's very easy to say who needs to do the work. So that's one of the things that I think we really need to think about in terms of what can be done. Just like this is a system that we can't necessarily see and touch, there's also a system that we have to create in terms of educating ourselves, in terms of training our faculty, our staff, our administrators. So I just think that's a point that we need to think about as well.
Professor.
Really quickly, I know we're kind of moving down on the rest of our comments. I just want to encourage us all and our administration and our leadership to think about bravery and being brave and not living in fear of what our General Assembly might do or what other Tennessean constituents might do, but be brave in trying to really create the policies and the type of campus community that we want to have. And if we get sued, and we fight. So, there are potentially precedents, and maybe we could have been that first one. So I just want us to think beyond the confines of some of these structures that we have and encourage us all to be brave. My first year here was when they defunded the Office of Diversity, and it was a rampant culture of fear of standing up to that. And I don't want to be complicit in that. And I have privilege as well, and I'm trying to use my privilege in ways to fight against these systems and structures and encourage our leadership and us all to be brave in that regard.
Thank you. Provost.
I feel compelled, Michelle, to respond to that because I've been privy to a chancellor who I think has been as courageous as we have had here on this campus. You know that she went to Nashville this last week to raise money for the Pride Center. And she paid a large cost for that. And through all of our conversations about this week's events, never once did I hear that we were acting because out of fear of being sued. Never once. I think that we have in our Chancellor someone who hears the pain that's being described here and expressed here and is actually standing up for what she believes in and what I think most of the campus believes in. I just could not let that observation go without giving my perspective on the Chancellor.
Thank you.
It's not about the Chancellor or anyone. It's all of us. I just want us all to be brave, and I know we're all trying really hard, and there's not always seems to be the right answer. It's difficult, and I think having these conversations is how we get closer to those types of discussions and outcomes.
That's great. Next question. Sorry, I dropped my pen. The next question is for Dean Houze. When students contact your office and they feel worried or threatened by hateful words or actions, how do we, as a Division of Student Life, and more specifically the Office of the Dean of Students, help them?
Thank you for the question. And again, I'm so honored to be here. It's day 43 on the job, and I've jumped right in. I didn't say that in my first response, but I'll say it now. So I think what we do as a Division of Student Life, and more centrally as a Dean of Students Office, is really we are at the center of a place that offers care and support for students in times of struggle and in times of triumph. So we are celebrating with students on their best days, and we are holding their hand on their worst days. And so, that's kind of our elevator speech, and it's not just a speech. We visit students at the hospital. We handle their families also, as we all know that it's not just the students, so we're often working with their families to provide a place of where they can be brave. We can't guarantee a safe space, but we can create and facilitate brave conversations, and that's what we try to do. This week, we've talked to a lot of students. We've talked to their families, probably more families than students, I'll be honest. And I'll give you an example. I talked to a mother last Friday after the rock event for about an hour and a half in my office, and she was very concerned about the events, and much of that conversation was me saying, say more about that, and listening, and her talking, literally stream of consciousness for quite a bit, and me saying, thank you for sharing that, and her talking some more, and me listening. And we don't do that very often. I think we talk at each other, but we don't necessarily pause to really listen and really hear what people are saying. So a good bit of that is what we do. And I followed up. There's an end to the story. So I talked to the mother, and I said, please have your student contact me, have her shoot me an email. Sure enough, she did the next day, and I'm visiting with her this week. And so that's a real life story of what we do. So I'll meet with that student, and I will just find out context. And every student is different, and so I'll ask her what's going on and get her to share that, because, again, I think we lump students into this is what black students feel, or this is what fill-in-the-blank students feel, and I want to know what this student is feeling and what she's experiencing. And she's living in a residence hall, and she's an out-of-state student, and she's a woman, and she has multiple identities, and they're all intersecting right now. So I'll spend some time just getting to know her. We happen to share a perceived lived experience as black women, and so oftentimes I also can hopefully be her person. And everybody needs a person, I come from the world of orientation, and we would often talk about how important it is to have a student see themselves represented on the stage, whatever that looks like. Major, hometown, race, gender expression, whatever the case may be. And that is important because we all need that. right? So even as a professional, I need other women that I share some commonality with, or fill in the blank social identity. And so for this particular student, that's what I'm doing. More concrete, we offer consultations in our office. So if a student has heard something, or if they've personally experienced something, they can report that on our website. They can come visit us and talk to us about that, and we have an organized way to investigate that. Oftentimes what I've experienced is that students have encountered emotional harm, generally not physical harm, but if that is necessary, we engage our colleagues within UTPD. We offer to be a resource if we need to physically walk a student over to the counseling center, or whatever the case may be. We want to make this place that is large for a lot of people feel really small. So the last thing I'll say is that we take the feedback. So some of the things that Michael mentioned about things he's heard from students, oftentimes we just hear things off, either from my staff, because I also oversee a department, so I might hear a staff member who talked to a student, and we have the ability to do something about it, talking about using your power for good. So then the Vice Chancellor and I can talk, or our senior leadership team can talk, or we talk to our colleagues in academic affairs or the Chancellor. So we are creating the change, and we don't necessarily see it tomorrow or next week, but there is a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes, but we also need to be held accountable for those things. And so, again, going back to that marketplace of ideas, we need to hear when you're not happy with things, and we do hear that. We never get emails, "Oh, you're so great." We get the emails about the things that we need to work on, and so we're working to that, and it's not a system that we've perfected, but we want to lead with care, concern, and compassion. In our office, we don't lead with free speech. So when someone is asking us about the events, we're first hearing that they're upset about it. And then we're going to talk about the law and all of those kinds of things, but we're leading with care and compassion first.
Great. Provost? Oh, quickly, Mickey, because I want to get our audience involved as well. So,
Sorry.
yes.
Okay, I'll be quick, promise.
All right.
I think it's important to think about not only the students who contact, but what about students who do not contact? So the students who do not feel comfortable coming to the Dean of Students, although we do have nice faces in there. But what about the students who are suffering mentally, having mental health that is declining, sitting in their rooms, not feeling compelled to go to class, or feel like they are falling in the shadows? How do we reach out to those students? How do those students get that equity of reaching out? And I think that is a very difficult question to answer, but I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Our next question is for our provost, Dr. Zomchek. John, have you studied other universities who've dealt with these types of groups? And what have they done right? What have they done wrong?
It's a big question. Thank you all for being here. It's a very humbling experience to be on this panel and to hear all these voices. It makes me glad that I'm here at the University of Tennessee to hear this variety. Everyone in the Chancellor, Chief Lane, Vice Chancellor Carilli, Vice Chancellor Robinson, we have all been reaching out to all of our colleagues across the country to try and figure out how to navigate this. What's happening here is happening in so many other places across the country. I don't think that there's a roadmap. I have a couple of guiding principles, and I'm going to try and say this very quickly. Listening to Michelle and to Dorian and to Michael and to Turner, Michael Higdon and Shea, our work isn't done. I don't think our work will ever be done. I don't think that we will ever have settled truth. I think that what we need to do, and the reason why we need to, I've been the voice that's been most insistent to allow these people to come to campus. And I have been, and I will admit, I will own that right now. And I have been most insistent not because of fear that they will sue, but because I believe it's part of our educational mission to allow all viewpoints on this campus, no matter how heinous. I personally believe that what these individuals stand for, that the doctrines that they espouse are evil. I believe that in my heart and soul. But I believe as officers of the state that we cannot say, you can't come here and say that. I do not want the state to govern any kind of speech whatsoever. And that's been the principle that's guided my thinking. And so when I look at what other people have done, I looked at the University of Colorado and the president's statement at the University of Colorado. And what he said was that we as educators have the responsibility to shine the disinfecting light of truth upon these benighted and ignorant and evil beliefs. I look at what the president and provost from Stanford University, a private university, has said. And what they say to their campus is, we have a responsibility to allow all viewpoints to be presented, but we have an equal responsibility, as Shea was saying, to provide care and support to those who are injured by those absolutely heinous points of view. So for me, I think that ultimately what we owe to ourselves, owe to everyone around us, is to say, it's almost, I would call it something like a sacred obligation that we have to continue to debate these ideas. Not to debate them is to say, okay, we're going to pretend that they're not there and hope that they'll go away on their own. Will they ever go away? I don't know if they will ever go away. I certainly hope that they will go away for good and all. But I think that there's no chance that they would go away unless we, as a public educational institution, say, here it is, look at it. Here's why we believe that this is not only wrong, but evil. And decide for yourselves. And meanwhile, we have an equally sacred obligation, I believe, to provide care for our students, as Michael was saying, who feel marginalized, who are in the dorm suffering, who cannot bring themselves to reach out to others to look for some balm for their suffering. Finally, I'm an English professor. And as an English professor, I generally go back to texts. And there was a poet, actually a radical revolutionary poet in 17th century England, who wrote a defense of freedom of speech called Areopagitica, John Milton. And in this, he said, I hate a fugitive and cloistered virtue, unexercised and unbreathed. It's kind of archaic language. But what he's saying is that we get strong. We go to the gym. We exercise to make ourselves stronger. And he says that we can only know good by knowing evil and realizing that it's evil. And I think that's a responsibility that we as educators have. Thank you.
Great. If you will do so quickly, because I definitely want to get our audience involved in asking some questions as well. So please.
John, one thing you said that I definitely agree with, which you said more than one thing, but the work is never done. I agree. And that's part of when you do what we do as critical theorists. It's tiring work. And some days I'm banging my head. And this isn't directed at you because sometimes I question whether I'm critical enough from a critical theory perspective because I'm so logical. So I asked myself the other day, I'm like, what would be the response of people, not just on this campus, in the city, and in the state, if it was a Black Lives Matter group organizing on this campus? And I don't know the answer. I have an idea about some people's responses. But when I read like this group, you got to be vetted to get in. They've put some parameters according at least to the media. I don't think I'm getting in there. But I bet if it was a Black Lives Matter, I don't think they're going to be saying, let's close the door, because that's not what they're espousing. Okay, and I think sometimes people conflate or try to equate BLM to some of these neo-Nazi white supremacist groups, and so I struggle a little bit with the idea of debating what they're saying when they're racist. I'm just going to call them out, okay? But I'm just wondering, I think there have been some people in this state that have been quiet. And I'm wondering what would have been like if the group was a different hue, a different ideology, or would we just continue to be silent? And that's not for you, but that's just some things I was thinking of.
Our final question. And then we'll, again, ask our audience to participate and ask our panelists some questions as well. That goes to our chief here, Chief Lane. Some members of our campus community say that messages painted on the rock and the presence of extremist groups on our campus make them feel unsafe at UT. At what point does the police department get involved in protecting our safety from these folks?
Thank you, and sorry that I had to follow these distinguished panelists. This discussion, I'm just going to let you know, is exactly why I chose campus law enforcement. I spent several years as a city police officer and matriculated to campus to finish my degree and fell in love with it because I enjoy this. I learn from every one of these panels that I sit on, and I enjoy the thoughts and hope to continue to learn throughout my career. And then enjoy fishing the rest of my life. I heard a very famous quote just today that said the answer is not always satisfactory to hear. Michael Higdon said that tonight. We can get involved in matters of speech, but only under certain parameters. If someone articulates an actual threat towards someone, then we begin to get into an area that we can interdict in law enforcement. But ultimately, we have to err on the side of First Amendment rights, even if we personally don't agree with what's being said. I personally feel that speech most often tells us more about the speaker than it does the content. If we passed laws that suddenly everyone adhered to, I wouldn't have a job. So we encourage people to call us when they see something that they feel is unsafe, and let us decide whether or not that's something that's allowed under the law. But always err on the side of calling us. I have always encouraged the use of our Guardian app, which goes along with our UT Alert. Unfortunately, out of the 60-some thousand people that we have signed up for UT Alert, we have less than 10% that have actually downloaded the Guardian app, which provides tips, guardians, instant 911, all those things. I've been very busy this last week and a half, and will continue to be busy, I think, for the foreseeable future, because I realize that even when Saturday comes to a conclusion, my job is not done. We'll plan for the next event and the next event, and we'll continue to learn from our colleagues and use those best practices. That phrase has been thrown out a lot this last couple of weeks, but there's a reason for that. I'm proud of what we do. I'm proud of how we represent this campus. I'm proud of the fact that we're not strangers with the people here. I sit in meetings weekly with many of these panelists. I have many of these panelists come to my office for training with our officers because we understand there's a difference between what we do here on campus and what other departments might do from day to day. And we feel that we are part of this campus, and I'm proud of that fact. But I always ask people to call us when they have a concern. Even if it's not something we can deal with, we know the resources that are available to us on this campus, and we can put them in touch with the people that can help.
Great. So now we'd like to ask our audience if they have any questions that you'd like to ask of our panelists. If you do, raise your hand. I'll come up and give you the microphone, and we'll let you. Oh, you've got the microphone, Kenny? Okay.
So this is to any of the panelists that would like to answer. So this is in regards to the comments that were made about the framers, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, being slaveholders. whilst having written the First Amendment. Pointing out the flaws, obviously slaveholding is, that's a very deep flaw, super immoral, but pointing out the flaws of the people who codified this idea in the U.S. law doesn't discredit the idea itself. That's an ad hominem argument. If we were to remove the robust protections of free speech in the U.S., speech would then be regulated with the force of law by the subjective standard of what is offensive and what is not. Would you be okay with Donald Trump wielding the power to restrict your speech?
Who'd like to answer that question?
Well, I guess I'll answer it since I know I'm the one that brought up that history. I think history is important and context is important, and our legal precedents are important to situate in the political, sociological, historical moment. A large percentage of our laws was used to oppress African Americans. We have to come to terms with that. Our law was used that way. We have to come to terms how the law itself is a political act, and so different folks will use it and create laws to that regards. I understand the ideals that come with some of these laws, which are beautiful ideas, but we are also all rooted in a social context, and we always have to put it in that social context. We have, as the Chief had mentioned, we have precedent within our legal system to protect against violence. Hate speech is violent. People have been killed. It incites violence. And I think we have to address that as well. I mean, it's just not any old debate, that we have in our classrooms about the topics that we teach. It's rooted in these larger histories of oppression that we have in the United States. And as beautiful as some concepts and ideas are, it's people who enact those ideas or not.
Other questions?
Beauvais Lyons, Faculty Senate President. Thanks for a wonderful panel. I want to direct my question to Professor Higdon regarding the 14th Amendment. It seems as if we're placing a lot of emphasis on the First Amendment, but the 14th Amendment, which was passed during the Reconstruction era, protected people for equal rights under the law. Where does that fit into this discussion?
I'll answer it, but I don't know how much you want to hear about all this stuff. Yeah, if you read the First Amendment, it says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. The First Amendment originally as an act only applied to the federal government, because when they passed the Constitution, when they ratified it, they were concerned about the federal government encroaching upon states' rights. We soon found out with the Civil War we couldn't trust the states to do the right things, right? I mean, after the Civil War, when we passed the 13th Amendment and we abolished slavery, well, the southern states got right back out to it, and they enacted black codes to sort of still, and they denied people the right to vote. So they thought, well, if we can't have slavery, we'll have as close as we can. So we passed the 14th Amendment, and you're right. That says that states can't deny people equal protection, due process, privileges, and immunities. Eventually, we had to interpret those phrases. What did due process mean? What does equal protection? And eventually, the Supreme Court said that selectively incorporated some of the Bill of Rights, so including the First Amendment. So that's how the First Amendment was then applied to the states. And for the most part, we have adopted it wholesale. Like however the First Amendment was interpreted to apply to the federal government, it now applies to the states. So in that regard, those terms don't have much new value. They just applied it to the states directly as before. It's called incorporation, if you want to read more about this not fun topic. Oh, he does want to talk more, okay.
So I think in the context of Obergefell, the way the 14th Amendment was cited by Anthony Kennedy, and it seems to me that if we want to balance the principles of free speech while also ensuring that in the case of having a campus community where everyone's equal access is protected, that they're not in a hostile campus environment, that the 14th Amendment in that context would have some application. And you're saying it really doesn't?
No, it absolutely does. I'm sorry. Okay. The 14th Amendment absolutely applies. To the fact any Bill of Rights applies to the states is through the mechanism of the 14th Amendment. Obergefell was about the fundamental right to marry that applies to the Due Process Clause. Here we're talking about the fundamental right to free speech. But the point you're making is a correct one. People who have said the status quo of the law, and please understand, I'm not telling you what the law should be or what I think. I'm telling you what it is. But people have said maybe we should change it for the reason you're saying. Because if you are going to make up for past discrimination and you are going to provide equal opportunity, maybe we can't be this rigid. Maybe we can't allow quite as much. I mean, that's the debate on one side. The debate on the other side is the one that we heard from Dr. Zomchik, and that is once you say, sure, this speech we're going to say can be eliminated. Once you do that, you're giving an administrator the ability to make those judgment calls to eliminate speech and not, and that makes us nervous, right? I mean, you talk about people writing the laws, people making those decisions, it gets into the same thing, because maybe the speech that you love so much might someday be on the other side of that, and you're being told you can't speak. Sorry, I think I've told you more than you asked for.
No, it's great.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Go ahead, Nick.
Hello. I'd like to thank the panel for volunteering their time. My name is Nick. I'm a graduate student here. I'm going to read my question that I wrote down because otherwise I'd probably babble. So my question is about the philosophy of our mission as a public university. As a public land-grant university, we receive funding from the state of Tennessee and tuition dollars from our students. So both groups have a vested interest in our operations. So my question is, what obligation does the university have to be open for public use? In regard to our policies, do you think we strike the right balance between being open for the public to use our facilities, for example?
Good question. Does anyone want to respond to that?
So
I think that, I mean, I'll actually respond to that, Nick.
Yeah,
I think
Nick,
it's a great
I was
question.
going to say that sounds like a great question for the Dean of Students or perhaps the Vice Chancellor for Student Life.
Thank you so much, Dorian. So I think that it really, truly is a great question. And I think that one of the things that we all know is having done our homework and learned from our peer and aspirant institutions that we interact with, this really has become a question on all of the campuses, which is how open should our campuses be to others to be able to use our facilities, particularly for a public institution. The state of Tennessee and I think the University of Tennessee have decided that we have an obligation to our community, and therefore we will make our campus open. I had an opportunity to spend 3 or 4 days with the chief student affairs officers of the large public institutions in the Southeast over the past couple days. And one of the unintended consequences that I learned about from one of our colleagues at another school was that they decided to change their policy so that others couldn't use their space. And in fact, what they ended up doing is they ended up impacting their community much more negatively than they would other members of these groups that we don't like on our campus. And then it was the members of the community, particularly from a group of small religious organizations who didn't have enough money to build a church, that they used their facilities, to then say, no, you have to change it back because with the policy and the way that you've changed it, now we can't use your facilities either. So I think that you have to look at what the potential unintended consequences are from keeping a group out that may impact what's happening within your local community on a much more regular basis. My perspective, I think we have an obligation to find the balance between the two.
More of a question and a conversation which we're having and will continue to have, which is if we know groups espouse violent white supremacists, have impacted harm upon others, do they have a right to our space? I mean, I hear that argument, and I hear how it can turn into the slippery slope argument on speech, but I think as I was talking to other panelists before, it's kind of easy to get caught up in like we're all academics, we like to talk anyway, to talk about these ideas. You know, we could talk about legal theory and to talk about, you know, these histories and what's the right decisions, but we don't always root that in the empirical world of our realities, right? What potential harm, like real harms, like psychological, mental, and physical harm that can come about having a group such as this group that is coming to our campus. And what is our role and responsibility there? And I think this is what we're talking about. And I mean, I think myself, I'm coming out pretty strongly on how I feel about that. But I mean, I'm glad we're having this discussion. But again, I just I keep bringing up history in this context because of this history that has served such violent acts with this group, with what they represent. And I want us to remember that, because God forbid violence does occur again. And I was like, I'm nervous even thinking about it, like I'm going to do everything in my bone to speak out against what not only this group stands for, but what I think my personal responsibility is, and what I hope others will continue to think their responsibility is.
Other questions? Microphone coming your way.
Hi, my name is Katie Childs. I teach in English and Africana Studies, and the title of the panel is Your Voice Matters, a panel on free speech. And I wondered what this panel might look like and what folks might say if the panel was not about free speech, what was about hate speech as the frame. I've been doing a lot of reading, and some of the things that I've read have said along the lines of what Interim Purpose Zomchek has said about free speech being the bedrock of this democracy. But I have also read some folks who say abstract rights are not actually ensured for everyone in the country differentially upon their lived experience. So some writers will say, sure, African Americans had the right to vote in the rural South in the history of this country, but when they were terrorized and brutalized by the KKK, the enactment of that right to vote was nearly impossible. And I just wanted us to think a little bit more about hate speech, because some of the other things I've read, people have said, the TWP and other white supremacist groups claim that they really value free speech because they want to be able to say the hateful things that they say. But the effect of that is that it shuts down free speech and marginalized peoples who are intimidated and terrorized by those groups. And so I just wonder what it would look like if we talked more about the hate speech aspect, because it seems as if the free speech of some folks on the other side of the white supremacists, that is being shut down through intimidation and physical or mental or psychological violence. So what would the panel look like if we talked about hate speech?
That was a comment, right? Not a question.
Personally, I think it would be a very different conversation. I think that we would be talking about the impacts of those words as opposed to perhaps the legal right that we've talked about tonight. But I do think they're very different things, obviously. But I also think that the context is very different. I guess I would say that if this panel were to talk about hate speech, I think we would be talking about the impact. I think what we've said tonight is, legally speaking, the U.S. Constitution doesn't distinguish between the two. And that's codified in law, and that's been supported by the Supreme Court with various decisions to that regard. But I do think that if we were talking about hate speech, we'd be talking a lot more about impact than perhaps the legal grounds.
I just wanted to add, we want to talk about hate speech because that's what the context also of this event is. And so, and I think a lot of us have addressed the impacts, and a lot of us have addressed the harms that we think will come. And I think in that context of discussing free speech in that construction, because this event is taking place, and that's the kind of the context of which it's going to be taking place. It doesn't mean that we can also disagree on that, which I think we have on this panel. But I just want to reiterate Dr. Childs' sentiment that several of us have been discussing in conversations with other students, is that the act of hate speech is to shut down free speech and dialogue. And it's about power and intimidation. And that is not, a free marketplace of ideas there. There's power and intimidation in that process, and it's also wielded with violence. And these particularly groups wield that with violence and have. And I don't want that to get lost in our academic discussions about this. And I think refocusing it on impacts and harms and refocusing on the experience of students, as our students have talked about, is really, really important, because whatever happens this weekend, we are going to be addressing and dealing with the implications of that for a long time. And as Dr. McCoy and others have talked about, and as well, this is a particular political moment that we're living in, and these issues are probably we will keep coming up, and other things might happen. Elections are coming, all these things are coming up that we need to prepare for. And so I hope this not only opens this dialogue, but as others have talked about, think about what type of university space do we ultimately want to try to create. If we're bounded by these provisions and these legal structures, what can we do within that context? And what can we push to change certain contexts so we can better protect our students and our faculty and our staff who are also feeling marginalization in these ways?
One thing
Go ahead, please.
To address what Dr. Childs is saying, this is in some ways about hate speech, because Michael Curtis talked about some of those psychosocial stressors, okay? The Dean of Students talked about that. Parents, students, members of the UT community, if it was safe speech, we wouldn't be feeling that way, okay? There's a reason some people on this campus feel the way they do. And why they are experiencing some anxiety, some stress. I had one of my students, and I only teach grad students, but these students typically are working with undergraduates. And in multiculturalism last week, and we spent the first part of the semester talking about race, racism, both in higher ed and in society. I had a student say, I had a white male come in the office and say, I don't understand what they're upset about. I don't understand what students are worried about. But if you support what Dr. Christian has said, we've got to look at the historical context. We've got to look at the current campus climate. Mickey talked about people crossing Ped walking, having the N-word or racial slurs screamed at them. I talked about my kids. So we are. It's hateful. It's incite.
Dialectic. And I understand that there are real injuries and suffering that happen from the engagement with these ideas, but finally I come down on the side that the Bill of Rights and what that guarantees for us is not an academic. It's not settled doctrine. I think it's always in danger, and when we act as an institution to shut down even hateful speech, I think that it's not so much as a slippery slope argument, but I think that we stray from the principles. So it's principles and practice. And I know that many people disagree with me here in this room, but for me, that's never academic. Never academic. What it is it's an important part of our lives, as important as it's part of our history, and as important as responding to the real injuries of class and race and gender that happen every day in our society. But I don't think we do anyone a service by saying, let's just get rid of this thing over here.
Thank you.
I agree that this is this dialectic, and it's really difficult, as this weeks have been for us all, and we've been in conversations, and I'm losing sleep at night, and it's just a really rough time for many of us, and hopefully all of us are feeling that way. But there are other countries that have chosen to regulate hate speech in more overt ways, and it hasn't led to kind of structures that are going to stop other forms of speech in democracy, such as Denmark, Sweden, Great Britain, and then, of course, we know the history of Germany. And so I think there's just other options we should be thinking of, and I think there's discussions we need to continue to have about the larger history of where free speech came from, and also how it's been used politically and socially throughout our time.
We got time for one more question. You've got it. Now the pressure's on. It's got to be really good.
I'm tense. I'm Dr. Victor Ray from the Department of Sociology, and I understand this idea of free speech being applied in an abstract and equal manner. And so in that context, I'd like to think about, I guess it was 2 years ago when the Office of Diversity was actually eradicated by the state legislature for what appeared to me to be speech acts, right? So they asked very nicely that the university, or that faculty choose of their own volition to be cognizant of people's choice in their expression of gender and their pronouns. And the second thing they did was they asked that we choose to be as inclusive as possible when departments have holiday parties, right? And so if we think of the protection of freedom from religion, that is also sort of an abstract principle that we should all agree upon. And in that case, what the state legislature did, which we all know, is they defunded the Office of Diversity, and they put those funds into, I think it was scholarships for students in engineering. Right? So in that case, I'm wondering a couple of things, right? So we have this actual concrete example in the recent history of the university, which from my perspective appears to be also a clear violation of speech, right? So, and a violation of faculty governance, university sovereignty, in which the state interfered with free speech. And in this case, we have the free speech of fascists and Nazis, and this is not being hyperbolic, this is their own rhetoric, also being protected by the state, right? And so what appears to me to be the abstract principle that's applicable across cases here is harm directed at communities of color, right? And I just wonder where this strong defense of free speech was 2 or 3 years ago when the state literally stepped in and eradicated a space for marginalized folks on campus.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
I was as opposed to that as I am to this. And again, I don't want the state saying what we can and cannot say. The state didn't say that we couldn't do that. What they did was they said that we couldn't use their money for that. And what the Chancellor has been trying to do is find private funding. I think that that's the danger that we face when we follow the lead of our legislature and say, you know what, we're going to fight that speech. I guess that's how I would think about that, Victor.
Okay, we're about at the appointed time. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and certainly want to thank our panelists for being with us and for sharing their thoughts. We can give them a round of applause. Again, a reminder that on Thursday night we have another event at 5:30 in Cox Auditorium, is it? In Cox Auditorium, where our speaker from the Southern Poverty Law Center will be. We would encourage you to come out on Thursday night as well. Again, once again, thank you all for being here tonight, and have a good night.